June 5th, 1944. What kind of battlefield turns a tank into a rolling nightmare, wrapped in concrete and jagged nails, as if the war itself had grown teeth? And what did those Marines see that made them do it? The answer isn't just strategy, it's fear, survival, and something far darker that unfolded in the Pacific during World War II, where U.S. Marines faced an enemy that refused to surrender and a terrain that seemed alive with death itself. As dawn broke over Saipan, the air already smelled like burned metal and wet earth. And inside a battered Sherman tank, a young Marine medic barely 19, hands shaking but steady enough to save lives, pressed gauze into a wound while bullets clanged like hail against steel, muttering, "Stay with me, buddy, don't you check out now," even as the tank crew yelled coordinates and cursed under their breath. Because out there, Japanese soldiers weren't just attacking, they were crawling, sneaking, climbing onto tanks with satchel charges, turning armored beasts into coffins in seconds. And that's when the idea came, crude but genius, to coat tanks in concrete and hammer nails and scrap metal into their surfaces, making them impossible to climb, turning them into spiked monsters that ripped apart anything that got too close. A brutal solution born not in a lab, but in the blood-soaked chaos of island warfare. And it worked, but it also made those tanks look like something out of a horror story. Silhouettes of steel covered in jagged shadows, rolling through palm trees and shattered bunkers while screams echoed in the distance. Because war in the Pacific wasn't clean or distant. It was up close, personal, and terrifyingly silent at times. Especially at night when Marines swore they could hear whispers in the jungle, enemy soldiers moving through the dark. Or maybe just the wind, or maybe something worse. Because there were nights when wounded men cried out for help in voices that didn't sound human anymore. Voices that dragged medics like our young Marine into traps, forcing them to choose between saving a life or walking straight into death. One night, around 0200 hours, he crawled out under fire toward what he thought was an American soldier calling for his mother, only to find a Japanese fighter barely alive, clutching a grenade, eyes wide and hollow. And for a split second, time froze, fear met compassion. And then everything exploded in chaos, leaving the medic half-deaf, covered in dirt and blood that wasn't all his own, crawling back with tears in his eyes but still dragging another wounded Marine with him. Because that's what they did, they didn't quit. Even when the world turned into something unrecognizable. And through all this, those modified tanks kept moving, grinding over debris, blasting bunkers, protecting infantry. Their bizarre armor saving lives again and again, but also becoming symbols of just how desperate things had gotten. Because when you're nailing spikes into your own war machines, you're not just fighting the enemy, you're fighting fear itself. And yet there was still humor. Dark and sharp like everything else out there, Marines joking. Guess we're driving porcupines now, or naming their tanks after girls back home. Painting crude art over the concrete, clinging to anything that reminded them they were still human. But beneath that humor was exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones, where every step feels heavier, every sound sharper, every shadow suspicious. And the medic, our guy, kept going, stitching wounds, dragging bodies, sometimes failing, sometimes winning, always carrying the weight of every face he couldn't save. Because war doesn't just leave scars on the land. It etches them into memory, and even years later, veterans would talk about those nights in whispers. About the tanks that looked like monsters, about the jungle that never slept, about the feeling that something unseen was always watching, waiting. So when you hear about Marines covering tanks in nails and concrete, don't just think innovation, think desperation, think survival. Think about young men thrown into hell and forced to adapt in ways no one should ever have to. And if this story hits you, if you can almost hear those echoes, feel that tension, drop your thoughts below. Share what you think those Marines were really feeling out there, and tell me this. If you were in that tank, surrounded by darkness, whispers, and enemies who never stopped coming, would you have had the courage to keep going? Or would the fear have taken hold first?